Ever since I was little, I knew I wasn't the favorite child. My name is Ava, and in our house in Milwaukee, my brother Ethan was always the center of attention while I was just a quiet shadow in the background. Ethan, 4 years older than me, wasn't just separated by age. To my parents, even his smallest accomplishments were treasures. No matter how hard I tried, all I ever got was a polite nod at best. I still remember one evening when I was 9. I brought my mom a completed application for a weekend art class at the local community center. I had filled it out myself and even attached a watercolor painting I was proud of. She read it, smiled gently, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Maybe next semester, sweetheart. I just paid for Ethan's advanced guitar class." I nodded, took the form back to my room, and tucked it into my desk drawer. I never mentioned it again. It was different with Ethan. As soon as his music teacher said he had potential, my parents sprang into action. They hired a private vocal coach, bought a professional microphone, and turned our living room into a home studio. His singing practice stretched for hours every evening, while Mom beamed with pride. "He's going to make something of himself," she'd say. Meanwhile, I studied in my room trying to focus through the noise and constant praise. When I once asked to attend a summer reading camp, the answer was, "The family budget's a bit tight right now." Tight was a soft way of saying everything went to Ethan. Dinners were always the same. Ethan talked, our parents listened. He'd share news about his latest music piece, new friends, or upcoming performances. I sat quietly, cutting my carrots, waiting for a chance to say I got an A in English. By the end of the meal, I hadn't spoken a word. When Ethan entered high school, the difference grew more obvious. If a teacher praised him, Mom would immediately tell relatives and neighbors. But when my teacher texted that I was well behaved, Mom simply replied thanks and put her phone away like the message never happened. By the time I was 14, I understood one thing. If I wanted anything in life, I'd have to get it myself. I stopped expecting, stopped asking, stopped explaining. I became an expert at swallowing my words and smiling like nothing was wrong. Once I asked my dad why Ethan always got more attention. He hesitated, then said, "Ethan truly has talent. You're good too, but he's got the kind of potential that can go far." I turned away, hiding the tear about to fall, not because his words were harsh, but because they confirmed what I'd always felt. I was never the first choice in my own family. After that, I stopped waiting for recognition. The summer I turned 15 while Ethan was preparing to start college with a full scholarship to Emerson University and a fully furnished apartment leased in our parents' name, I quietly looked for a part-time job. A teenage girl without a driver's license didn't have many options in a small city like Milwaukee, but my grandparents, owners of a small antique store on the outskirts of town, gave me a chance. On my first day, my grandfather pointed to a dusty pile of old books and said, "If you can handle the smell and don't mind cleaning, this place is yours starting today." I nodded without hesitation. Every afternoon after school, I took a 40-minute bus ride to the shop. The work wasn't glamorous, dusting, organizing, labeling, and occasionally helping Grandma ring up sales, but I gradually fell in love with the old pieces full of history. Every pocket watch or black and white photo held a story, a sharp contrast to the silence I'd grown used to at home. On cold days, Grandma brought me grilled cheese sandwiches and hot chocolate. She often said, "You may not be the center of someone else's world, but don't forget you are the whole sky in your own." I remembered every word. 3 years passed. While Ethan was being driven around in a new car, living rent-free and getting weekly allowances from our parents, I was still riding the bus home every night, my sleeves scented with old wood and book dust. I wasn't jealous of him, I just stayed busy. I saved every penny from the shop, kept every receipt, and enrolled in the state university, not as prestigious as Emerson, but affordable with a solid business program. I chose the practical path, not the flashy one. When I received my acceptance letter, I printed the PDF and taped it to my bedroom door. No one asked. No one congratulated me. At the time, Ethan was in his senior year of college and had just landed an internship offer in Boston. My mom was overjoyed as if he'd won the lottery. I sat at the dinner table quietly picking at my green beans, feeling invisible. I thought even if I got into Harvard, she'd probably just nod and move on. I chose to study locally and stayed at home to save money on rent. That meant waking up at 5:30 a.m. every morning to catch the first bus and working evening shifts at a nearby cafe after classes. I didn't have time to complain. Instead, I built a detailed budget plan, took free online courses, and slowly built a small fund I called my freedom account. It wasn't just money, it was the belief that one day I'd be strong enough to walk away from this place. I never asked my parents for a dime toward my education. I even chipped in monthly for utilities. Still, they often said, "Ava, you're so responsible, not like Ethan. He calls every time he needs something." I'd smile, but something inside me grew colder. Ethan was still their pride and joy. He graduated with a grand celebration cake. Fresh flowers, guests, even a professional camera to capture every moment. When I finished my freshman year with a perfect GPA, my parents sent me a single text, "Well done." I got used to it. Instead of seeking attention, I poured all my energy into work and school. I knew patience and independence were my ticket out of a cycle of favoritism I never signed up for. What I didn't know was that someday the money I saved through sweat and sacrifice would become a target not by strangers, but by the very people who shared my blood. When that day came, it wouldn't just be a lesson about kindness, it would be a brutal wake-up call about the limits of endurance. Ethan graduated the spring I turned 21. I still remember the day I was restocking pastries at the campus cafe when my mom called, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Ava, Ethan just proposed to his girlfriend, and she said yes." I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to sound neutral. "Really? That's great. Tell him congratulations." I didn't need to ask who it was. Since his sophomore year, Mom had been talking about Olivia, the blonde girl in his business program in Boston. Every time she mentioned her, she called her the kind of girl worthy of Ethan, as if the world had only one type of person suitable for our family. Not long after the official announcement was posted on our family group chat and Mom's Facebook, Ethan and Olivia were getting married in September at a luxury resort in Vermont. Attached was an entire photo album of the proposal at sunset, with a banner flown by a small airplane across the sky and a diamond ring nearly the size of a fingertip. I skimmed through it, then went back to my unfinished finance assignment. 2 weeks later, during dinner, my parents informed me they had decided to take out another loan to fund Duch's proper wedding for Ethan. "This is the most important day of our son's life," Mom said, eyes gleaming. "He deserves the best. The resort, a live band, a 5-course meal, even fireworks." I gently set my spoon down and asked, "What about the mortgage that's still unpaid?" Dad avoided my eyes. Mom gave a soft laugh. "Don't worry. Your father and I have it all figured out as long as Ethan and Olivia are happy." I didn't say another word. I knew no matter what I said, I'd always be an outsider in these decisions. From June to September, our house turned into wedding headquarters for an event that cost nearly $48,000. Mom took a leave of absence from work to focus on the wedding. Meanwhile, I kept working morning shifts at the cafe, going to school in the afternoon, and helping clean up in the evenings because the house was overflowing with wedding gifts, fabrics, and invitations. One day, Mom handed me a large cardboard box and said, "Here's your bridesmaid dress. Try it on and see if it fits." Inside was a pastel pink satin gown, and tucked into a side pocket was a receipt for almost $350. I looked up and asked gently, "Am I paying for this myself?" She looked at me like it was obvious. "You're an adult now, Ava. It's your responsibility. I've already had to juggle enough to afford the live band." I nodded and said nothing more. That night, I sat in front of my laptop and quietly paid for the dress with my credit card. It was my biggest expense that month and the first time I ever cried over a dress. The wedding went exactly as they had dreamed, extravagant, sparkling, filled with laughter and glittering lights. I wore the expensive bridesmaid dress, stood beside the happy couple, smiled under the chandeliers, and played my part perfectly. No one knew that the night before I had walked nearly 2 miles from the bus stop home because I'd missed the last ride. No one asked how many hours I'd slept that week while helping set up. They were too busy celebrating Ethan's happiness. After the reception, when all the guests had left, I stood at the sink helping Grandma wash glasses. She looked at me and said softly, "I'm proud of you, Ava, not for standing on stage, but for standing strong when no one was behind you." I smiled a genuine smile, a rare one that day. I thought everything would be over after that. I was wrong. 1 year later, Ethan and Olivia announced they were moving to Connecticut to manage a new branch of Olivia's family business. My parents sent them off with tears-long hugs and a starter support fund of nearly $12,000, pulled from a second mortgage they never mentioned to me. I stood at the door watching them leave, my chest feeling strangely cold, not from jealousy, but from a gut feeling that the weight wouldn't fall on Ethan anymore. It would fall on me. After the wedding, the apartment my parents had rented for Ethan near Emerson was left empty. I knew that apartment well. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, an open kitchen, and a bright balcony. It was just a 15-minute walk from the campus where I studied. At the time, I was in my final year of college, juggling full-time classes and 2 part-time jobs to stay afloat. Every morning felt like a race against the clock, and the city buses were almost always late. I was starting to feel burnt out. One Sunday night, after a long evening shift at the cafe, I cautiously brought up the apartment with my parents. I know Ethan's apartment is empty now. If possible, I'd like to move in. It would make studying and working easier. Mom looked up from her phone, glanced at Dad, then replied flatly, "If you want to live there, you'll need to pay rent." But Ethan didn't pay. I blurted out. The air turned heavy. Dad folded his newspaper and said in a level voice, "The financial situation is different now, Ava. We just took on another loan for Ethan's wedding. We can't afford to support both of you." I pressed my lips together, swallowing my frustration. They weren't wrong, they had the right to set terms for their property, but the double standard was undeniable. In the end, I agreed to pay half the market rate as Mom proposed, covering all living expenses and utilities myself. That weekend, I moved in. The living room walls still had tape marks from Ethan's old posters, and burn marks on the carpet from his last birthday party hadn't been cleaned. I didn't complain. At the very least, this was the first space I could call home. The following month, I graduated from college with honors. While my friends threw celebration parties, my parents sent me a pre-printed card that said, "Proud of you." No cake, no flowers, no family dinner. I let it go, because something better had come. I was offered a job at Westmore and Lanning, a well-known financial firm downtown with a starting salary far beyond what I'd expected. I shared the news with my parents over the weekend. Mom listened, then said flatly, "Good. So starting next month, you'll pay full rent." I froze. We agreed I'd only pay half until I was stable. "Well, you're stable now," she cut in without hesitation. "A big company like that good salary, too. There's no reason you shouldn't pay in full." I didn't argue. I'd learned every conversation like this had the same outcome. I'd have to give in. From then on, I transferred the full amount on time every month, not a dollar late. I kept working hard, waking up at 600 a.m., leaving the office at 700 p.m., returning to that worn-down apartment in silence, eating a quick dinner, and diving into more project work. I stopped calling home often. Every call was either about rent or updates on Ethan and Olivia, how they'd moved into a new house in Connecticut under Olivia's family name, how they were expecting a baby, how Ethan was mentioned in a local business article. Whenever Mom shared those things, I stayed quiet. I had learned to listen without feeling hurt, a skill no one taught me, one I mastered on my own. One late night, I received an email from HR. I was being considered for a promotion to assistant project manager. I had only been working there 7 months, and I was already on the internal advancement list. I was so happy I sat on the couch for hours stunned. I didn't call my parents. I didn't want my success turned into another excuse to raise the rent. A few days later, I opened the door to find Mom standing there with an envelope in hand. "Just stopping by to check on you," she said, placing the envelope on the table. I opened it. Inside was a notice of rent adjustment, a 15% increase starting next month. I looked at her, trying to stay calm. "What's the reason this time rising costs, and now that you've got a new position, right?" she said casually. I nodded, then walked into my room and closed the door. In that moment, I knew this apartment had never truly been mine. If I stayed, I'd forever be a walking wallet in their eyes. But I didn't leave right away because I had a plan and I wanted them to face the consequences when it was carried out. I had just finished an important meeting when my phone buzzed. It was Mom calling. "Ava, we need to talk about Ethan." I sat in the car, still holding my cup of hot coffee. Her voice softened like something was off. "The company in Connecticut went bankrupt. Olivia's family is furious. They say Ethan messed with the records, overspent the budget without reporting it. It turned into a big fight. Now they want the house, the car, and even custody of the baby if there's a divorce." I closed my eyes. My gut instinct was chillingly accurate. Mom continued, her voice more rushed. "Ethan, Olivia, and baby Mason need a place to stay for now. You know the apartment you're renting is the biggest one, and it has 2 bedrooms. I opened my eyes and sat upright. You're planning to move them in with me." The silence stretched long. Then Mom said something that almost made me drop my coffee. "They'll stay rent-free for a while, but you'll keep paying the full rent like usual." I let out a bitter laugh, not that she could hear it. "I've been paying full rent on this apartment for 2 years. Now you want Ethan's whole family to live here, and I'm supposed to keep funding it. It's only for a few months. I know you'll understand," she said. I hung up without another word. Inside, my answer was crystal clear. This wasn't a request. It was an order, and I no longer had a say. 3 days later, Ethan and his family showed up with a carload of luggage baby toys, a crib, a rocker, and even a fancy espresso machine that cost more than anything I'd ever owned. Olivia didn't say a word when she walked in, just glanced around like she was evaluating her temporary space. Mom came along too, walked around the apartment, then pointed to my bedroom. "This room is quiet enough for Mason. Ava, you can sleep on the sofa for now." I stood still. I'm the one paying rent. "This is my room. Your kid isn't a newborn. You don't need that much space. Babies need a stable environment. Don't you understand?" she shot back. I wanted to say I had once been a child too, one who needed her own quiet corner to dream and rest, but never got it. Instead, I stayed silent. I packed my things neatly and moved to the sofa by the window. The next 3 months were a waking nightmare. I became the unpaid maid, the reluctant cook, and the sole financial provider of the apartment. Ethan didn't work. He lounged in the living room all day, scrolling through his phone, watching old videos from his successful days, sighing dramatically. Olivia didn't work either. She ran errands or shopped, leaving Mason with me after my long shifts. No one asked if I was tired. No one cared if I needed peace. The meals I cooked disappeared within 15 minutes. Dishes piled up, baby clothes draped across the balcony. The utility bills doubled. When I finally brought up the idea of them pitching in, Mom called that evening, her voice sharp. "Ava, stop being selfish. Your brother's going through a tough time. He used to have it all, now he's lost everything. Can't you carry a little for your family?" I laughed quietly. "I've been carrying since I was 16, Mom." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, now covered in baby stickers, reviewing my bank statements. The numbers didn't lie. At this rate, I wouldn't afford rent much longer. One night, I overheard a conversation between Ethan and Mom in the living room. They didn't know I was home. "Don't worry," Mom said. "I'll take half of Ava's rent each month and give it to you. Think of it as remote support." "That's perfect," Ethan replied, sounding relieved. "At least someone in this house gets it." I stood, frozen chills running down my spine. They weren't just taking space. They were using me like a bottomless wallet. The next evening, after everyone was asleep, I opened my laptop and revisited the folder I named Freedom, where I had saved apartment listings. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I had lived my whole life in silence. It was time to break it. On a Monday morning, while rushing through a dry piece of toast before an online meeting, Mom showed up at my apartment door, holding a stack of papers. "Ava, we need to talk about the rent." I looked up, swallowing my bite. "I paid it on time this month." She placed the papers on the table, pulling out a printed notice. "Starting next month, the rent will double." The room fell silent. I set my coffee down and looked her in the eyes. "Double? Are you serious? You can see for yourself," she began. "There are more people living here now, more water, more electricity, more wear on the appliances. You have a steady job, Ava. You should be helping the family more." I leaned back in my chair, trying to stay composed. "And Ethan? He still isn't paying a cent. He's going through a crisis. He lost everything. But you have everything right now. Don't be petty." I gave a dry laugh. The everything she mentioned was an apartment I paid for, sleeping on a sofa, cooking meals I rarely ate, working nonstop, all while being treated like a money dispenser. That night, I reviewed my bank statements and budget again. If the rent doubled, almost my entire income would go to keeping this place where I didn't even have my own space. Something didn't add up. My gut told me there was something darker behind this. In one rare moment, Mom left her phone on the kitchen counter. A notification from Ethan popped up. "Mom, can you send $400 this week? Olivia wants that high chair for Mason, the one she saw at Target. It's really nice." Another message followed. "Oh, and if Ava asks, just say it's for plumbing repairs." "Okay." My chest tightened. I opened the phone. No password needed. Mom never thought I'd snoop. A long thread of texts appeared. For the past 3 months, every time I transferred my rent, Mom had been secretly giving half to Ethan and Olivia, calling it emotional support to help them through a tough time. I stood frozen. It wasn't the money. It was the betrayal done in secret. No warning, no thank you. That night, once everyone was asleep, I sat on the balcony wrapped in a thin blanket. I stared at the glowing windows of far-off buildings and wondered if one belonged to someone like me, someone who once believed hard work would be enough. I was wrong. I went back to the living room, which also served as my bedroom, opened my laptop, and typed search terms. 1-bedroom apartment near downtown, no roommate, lease, private space only. After an hour, I found that a quiet, modest building 10 minutes from my office. The landlord was a kind, middle-aged woman whose only requirement was a stable income and someone who respected the space. I sent an email requesting a showing the next morning. The next day was Friday. While preparing materials for a presentation, Mom called again, this time with an unusually sweet tone. "Ava, I just talked to Ethan. Could you transfer the rent today? I'm planning to split it and send half to the kids for groceries this weekend." I paused for a few seconds, then replied, "Of course, Mom. But this will be the last time." She hesitated. "What do you mean?" I didn't respond. I smiled gently, like someone folding the final letter before sending it off. It just needed 30 more hours to finish everything I had been quietly preparing for over a week. I had already signed the lease for a new apartment, a small, tidy one-bedroom on the third floor of a quiet building, an 8-minute walk from my office. The landlord was a kind elderly widow whose only request was no noise, no drama. I promised her I'd had more than enough drama in my life, mostly from people who shared my blood. I bought the biggest suitcase I could find on Amazon with same-day delivery. After work, I began quietly packing my things in the apartment I once called home, now nothing more than a place I deposited my paycheck in dignity. I didn't touch anything that wasn't mine. I left the chairs, the table, the espresso machine I never used. I packed only my clothes, laptop, a few books, one bedside lamp, and the only things truly mine: silence, patience, and a will that could no longer be broken. That night, Ethan was glued to his old vlogs on YouTube, and Olivia was rolling her hair in what used to be my bedroom, now called Mason's quiet nap room. I taped a small note to the fridge: don't look, don't call, and don't expect another dime. At 2:10 a.m., I quietly wheeled my 2 suitcases down the hallway where I had lived for 3 years, both as a tenant and a puppet. I had never seen the Milwaukee sky feel so peaceful. No shouting, no baby cries, just one: Ava dragging her luggage down the sidewalk, walking toward freedom. My new apartment wasn't big, but no one there demanded rent just to hand it to someone else. No one called me selfish for not supporting grown adults. No eyes looked at me like I was an ATM with legs. The next morning, I sat on the empty floor, coffee in hand, and played soft piano music. As the notes echoed around the space, I knew I had made the most important move of my life. A week passed, no calls, no messages. I exhaled. Then came the first of the month, the day I usually sent the rent. My phone rang. It was Mom. I didn't pick up. 3 hours later, a message came through Ava, just a gentle reminder today's rent is due. Ethan's planning to take Mason for a checkup, and I haven't been able to send them extra this week. I smiled, just as I expected. I typed each word slowly, deliberately. Mom, maybe you haven't realized. I moved out last week. You won't be receiving another cent, not today, not next month, not ever. Less than 5 minutes later, the phone rang nonstop. I let it ring in silence. When I didn't answer, Mom sent a long message, half angry, half pleading: Ava, you're being unreasonable. You know your brother is going through a hard time. I only took part of your rent to help him get back on his feet. That's what family does, we share. How could you just walk away like this? I replied with one line. Family isn't where one person carries everything and the others only take. Less than a minute later, a new message came, this time from Ethan. So you really bailed, huh? Congrats. Hope your new bed is big enough to hold all your selfishness. I read it and felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, just a strange, quiet relief because I was no longer trapped in a version of family built on duty and exploitation. I blocked their numbers after that, every call, every message, every thread. That winter, the snow came earlier than usual. My little apartment was warmed by an old gas heater, but it felt cozier than anywhere I'd ever lived because there was no invisible coldness from the people who were supposed to love me. I had just finished the first semester of my MBA with a straight A average. I'd started the program to see if I could do it, but the more I studied, the more I felt I had stepped into a new world, one where my worth was measured by knowledge, effort, and resilience, not by my last name or place in the family. At work, I was assigned to lead a collaborative project with the Chicago office. During a short business trip, I met Noah, the head of strategy there, 8 years older than me, and an alum of the same MBA program. We didn't fall into some movie-style romance, no lightning bolt, no late-night deep talks. It started with mutual respect, then short lunches, shared book suggestions, and eventually a peace I had never known around a man. Noah never asked about my family, but when I told him briefly, honestly, he just nodded. Some people have to leave to really live. I had gotten used to being strong on my own, but with someone beside me who didn't want to control or take from me, I realized strength doesn't have to mean solitude. We weren't in a rush. Both of us had our own past wounds, which made us more careful, more clear. Noah didn't show up as a reward after years of pain. He was a quiet confirmation that I'd been walking in the right direction and that there are still people who respect boundaries. Meanwhile, through Grandma, I learned things were falling apart back home. Ethan and Olivia had maxed out their credit cards and couldn't afford Mason's preschool tuition. Mom had started borrowing from friends to maintain appearances. The same people who once worshipped Ethan were now avoiding her calls. Grandma said Mom cried in the kitchen one day, repeating, "If only we hadn't let Ava go." But the truth is, they never had the power to let me go. I had walked away on my own and they couldn't stop me anymore. I didn't hate them. Hate takes energy to maintain, and I had redirected all mine toward my career, my education, and myself. I began turning my experiences into essays, not to complain, but to give voice to others like me. I shared one on a forum for financially independent women, and it unexpectedly went viral. A week later, I was invited to speak at a nonprofit for women's education. They asked me to join their series called Standing Up After the Shadows, not as a victim, but as a survivor who had redefined her future. The first time I stood on stage and saw people quietly wiping tears, I realized I wasn't telling just my story anymore. I was speaking for hundreds who hadn't yet found the strength. That night, I came home, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder titled Family. I didn't delete the old photos. I moved them to an external drive and renamed the folder Lessons Learned. No bitterness, no nostalgia, just the understanding that I didn't need to carry everything forward to move on. That weekend, Noah suggested we visit his mom in Vermont. I hesitated, but he gently took my hand and said, "Don't expect anything. I just want you to know that family can also be where you're loved the right way." I nodded, not because I needed to be healed, but because I was ready not for the past, but for the future. I had once been a shadow in my own home, but now I stood in the light, not because anyone led me there, but because I had found it myself. My story is a reminder that sometimes freedom doesn't come from escaping others. It begins the moment we dare to set clear boundaries for ourselves. No one is born to be a wallet for the irresponsible, and family should never be an excuse for injustice. In real life, strength isn't always about enduring. Sometimes it's about walking away, standing tall, and building a life that belongs to you. I did it, and so can you.